After I wrote my first essay about one of my favorite podcasts, My Favorite Murder, a true crime comedy podcast, I knew I had to continue the theme of true crime for my portfolio. When my professor told us about the wild card in our portfolio, and that it could be basically anything you wanted it to be, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Since I listen to crime podcasts pretty much on the daily, it seemed logical that I dedicate my wild card to the form of content I consume so much: podcasts. When I approached my English professor with my idea for my wild card, she told me that I had to do one of the murders that happened in Athens. So I began researching into the murder of Jennifer Lynn Stone in 1992. So, who was Jennifer Stone? She was a gifted photographer. She was actually majoring in creative advertising. She was in the sorority Kappa Delta, and she traveled Europe with her best friend and also her big sister in her sorority, Sandy Turner. And Sandy said that she was a wonderful, fun, creative, impish, beautiful person. Sandy also said that she made an impact on a lot of the people she met. She was a well known senior at UGA. And it was really unfortunate because she was just on the brink of graduation and she had a promising career in advertising. She already had an internship set up. She really had a lot of potential. So, before I get started, I wanted to just add some context to the story. So, in 1992, downtown Athens was transitioning from a sleepy retail center into a bustling residential and entertainment district. Unfortunately, the crack trade still thrived at night in some Athens side streets, but it was possible by day to window shop along downtown's tree lined main streets and have no idea of any illicit activity on the district's fringes. Um, so, actually, back in 1985, a couple had restored the old Presbyterian manse, which I learned is a word that refers to a small mansion. So the manse was at the corner of Clayton and Hull Street. It had a small house tucked behind it, known as a carriage house, where at one point the servants had lived. And the couple restored it as an apartment. By 1992, the couple had moved on, and the house was in the process of changing into offices, but Jenny Stone rented the little house in the back. Um, and Jenny was so happy to get a downtown apartment because it was so close to everything. I know that I'm looking forward as a senior to living off campus and having my own house at one point. At that time, nighttime foot traffic was primarily on Clayton. People were walking to restaurants and bars downtown, and the occasional traveler would walk by using the bus station next door to the manse. So Jenny lived in her small house, and on April 22nd, she was up late working on an advertising project for class. It was a mock ad campaign for peanut butter, and so she had her project spread out around the floor of her apartment. Um, at one point, her boyfriend dropped by, and then he left, and she kept working on her project. So, about 1 a.m. on April 23rd, her boyfriend called her and they talked briefly, and that was the last time she talked to anyone that the police could identify. So, the next day, April 23rd, Jenny had missed two school meetings, so three of her classmates wondered where she was, so they went to her house and found the door ajar. They looked inside, and it was clear that there had been a struggle. Jenny Stone was raped and murdered April 23rd, 1992, when she was 22 years old. Police arrived to find Jenny's dead body. Her shirt and bra were pushed up on her chest, and her shorts were on the floor at the end of the bed where she was found lying. There was blood under her fingernails, apparently from fighting to get the killer's hands off of her neck. Her nose and mouth were bleeding. And one horrific detail of this crime is the fact that her parents actually learned of her murder when they were watching the Atlanta Evening News, which is just so sad that that was the way the parents found out. In a lot of unsolved cases, you see that the reason that the crime remains unsolved is because of poor work by the police investigating missing things, investigating things that they should not have, focusing on the wrong people. But in this case, the police actually did a great job. So the lead investigator on the case was Athens Clarke County Police Lieutenant Smith. At the time, police said the home became the most thoroughly examined and guarded crime scene in the department's history. Detectives and forensic technicians painstakingly cataloged every shred of potential evidence over several days. So, using orange powder and an alternate light source, police found a smear about midway up on the wall where it looked like her face had hit. She had gotten into a fight or she had been punched. Athens police, and they also worked with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, the GBI, they searched every inch of the house and property. They were able to gather some semen and hair from the bed. They also found prints around the house, but the prints were smeared and unreadable, so they couldn't identify any of those prints. So Smith, along with a team of detectives and GBI agents, they questioned dozens of potential suspects and tracked down hundreds of leads, but no one has ever been charged. Some of those suspects include some judge's son, a day laborer. They searched throughout the county. They looked at a lot of homeless people, and they even looked into a well-known shoe shiner. They weren't leaving any stone unturned. So at that time, there was not a database to put the unidentified DNA to be able to try to find a match in a database. So the database that logged DNA of convicted felons, it was not created until 2000, which was 8 years after her murder. So in a lot of cases, the murder was committed by someone close to the victim. So that's exactly what the police started their investigation with. So her boyfriend and her ex-boyfriend were both eliminated. And they were just investigating and collecting DNA from anyone they suspected at that time. The public really wanted to know. So various psychics ended up calling, offering visions and feelings, but nothing panned out. And actually, a major rumor in Athens was that the murder was committed by a judge's son, and that as a result, the police covered it up, and this rumor really spread throughout town. Everyone had heard this rumor, but it turned out that the judge's son had a solid alibi. He was in rehab in a facility in Greene County where he didn't have access to a car or visitors. So the judge's son could not have committed this murder. So 2.5 months into the investigation, nothing had panned out. But then an Athens Clarke drug and vice unit officer, Kirk Ram, was a part of a drug raid in North Athens and ended up finding one of Jenny's cameras during the drug raid. So they matched the serial number. So police were smart about this because they decided to keep the robbery secret from the press and the public. So finding the camera was a big deal because no one else had known that anything was taken. So the camera led to 4 men potentially being involved. One of them was a witness, but they also looked into him as a suspect as well. But it was Donald, who went by the nickname Heavy Wilson. So Heavy was once a homeless man from Atlanta, and he ended up helping piece together the events between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. after the killing. So he recalled that he was going up the steps to his boarding house on Hancock Avenue near downtown when a man, let's just call this man Camera Guy, on foot called to him, "Where can I get rid of these cameras?" So Heavy pointed the Camera Guy towards a pool hall downtown, and apparently at the pool hall, the Camera Guy ended up trading the camera for a rock of crack. As he was smoking the crack, it came up that he had another camera. So eventually that Camera Guy, he ended up leaving the pool hall and went to the Parkview housing complex, and he traded the camera with, let's just call this guy Parkview Guy. And so he traded the second camera with the Parkview Guy for some more crack. And it turns out that Parkview Guy is cooperative with the police, and so he ended up being ruled out as the killer, and Heavy and the guy from the pool hall, they also were ruled out, and the police suspect Camera Guy as the killer of Jenny Lynn Stone. Heavy, along with other locals, describe the Camera Guy, or the suspect, as a light-skinned black man about 5'10" with a mustache. But this was only description, and it didn't exactly lead anywhere. So one interesting fact about the witness's description of him being a light-skinned male around 5'10", this description actually matched the DNA phenotyping, in which they are able to predict the physical characteristics of this killer. So the description was conclusive. They found in his DNA that he was most likely a mixed race individual, and this confirms the witness's description. So this is the theory that the police believe today. So since Jenny was working late, she decided to take a break after 1 a.m. and she left her home for some fresh air, or it's also widely believed that she went out for a smoke since she didn't smoke in her house. And Smith, the investigator, said that the front door to her house, it was hard to lock, so maybe she decided not to lock it so she could easily get back in, or since it was difficult to lock, maybe she thought that she had locked it but didn't, and as a result, a man slipped in when she was out, and the police believe that she walked in, came down the hall, and he saw her. So the police think it was a burglary. Smith, the investigator, thinks it was a burglary, but it also, with a little psychology, that he was already sexually aroused because he was in some nice girl's apartment. So when Jenny came back and walked in her apartment, he attacked her. They struggled in the kitchen, and the burglar forced Stone into the bedroom where he raped her and strangled her to death. And then the killer, he stole 2 of her cameras, traded one for a rock of crack cocaine at the pool hall nearby, then crossed West Broad Street to trade the other camera for more crack at the Parkview housing complex. Witnesses described a person with cameras as a light-skinned black man with a slight mustache, a person no one had seen before, and police believe that the man was a transient, someone who left town from the bus station that's adjacent to the home where she lived. So I don't necessarily believe with this theory because I don't believe that the man entered the home with just the intention of robbing and leaving. I believe that the man entered her home with the intention of raping and killing her, and then stole the cameras as an afterthought. I think that profiling the suspect as a robber was the wrong approach. I think this man has a problem that he has raped and killed before or after the fact. I don't think this man is just a robber. But one problem with my viewpoint is that if he was a killer that went in with the intentions of raping and murdering, it's likely that the killer has a criminal history from either before or after April 23rd, 1992. So the fact that DNA has not been linked to someone after, so the fact that DNA has not linked, so the fact that DNA has not been linked to someone that most likely committed and raped murder again. It doesn't really make sense. Um, but unfortunately, what I believe and the police also believe is that the reason the DNA has not matched yet is because the killer is dead. So the fact that the killer is dead mostly goes with the theory that the killer was a transient, um, that he had a drug problem, and that probably led to his death prior to 2000 when the database was created where convicted felons' DNA was entered into the database to be compared against. So if he had died prior to that, his DNA would not be in the database, and that's why there is no match. Um, so many people may wonder why hasn't this case been solved, especially with the fact that DNA was collected at the crime scene. But again, if the killer had died prior to 2000, that's a reason why he would not be in the database to match. So I believe that this case has not been solved due to the fact that the killer died prior to 2000. But that does not mean that the case could not be solved. Nowadays, there's new genetic genealogy that would work to identify the killer even if he is dead. So, genetic genealogy was used in the Golden State Killer case, where they were able to track the DNA of the killer's third cousin, and using that DNA, they were able to narrow down the relatives that could be the Golden State Killer, and using that, they found their suspect. And even though he was alive, it could still work for someone that was dead. And I think that's the biggest hope for solving the Jenny Lynn Stone case. So after Jenny's death, safety became a major priority downtown and the police presence increased. People were just more cautious. So this crime was the first murder in the business district of downtown Athens, and it rocked the town. It dominated state headlines for weeks. The public just wanted to know every detail. And people were just scared to go downtown because they feared something happening to them, like what happened to Jenny. Um, so the investigation for this case is not over. Western Judicial Circuit District Attorney Ken Maudlin last year formed a cold case unit that's looking into all unsolved murders in Clark and Oconee counties. And heading the unit is Assistant District Attorney Tony Volkodov, a former Atlanta police homicide investigator. And they are continuing to work Jenny's case, and they say they are working it from both ends. They want to re interview witnesses and take a second look at the evidence. Um, and they're hoping to go through the evidence and see if any of the evidence could be tested with new technology that did not exist when she was killed. And the Stone family is very supportive of this investigation. Jenny's name lives on with the Jennifer Lynn Stone Memorial Scholarship in Creative Advertising and the Jennifer Lynn Stone Award for Creative Advertising, both presented annually at the University of Georgia's Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication. It should be known that anyone with any information about her murder should call the GBI at 1-800-597-TIPS. And I really believe that this case could be solved with the new technology we have in genetic genealogy. And I think it's really important that we remember this case and that people stay aware of this case. And that's the only hope we have for solving it, is keeping her name out there.